I never expected that a simple challenge written on a paper cup would completely upend my life. But that's exactly what happened. It's funny, isn't it? How we build these routines, these little fortresses of habit to keep the world predictable. My fortress was built on black coffee, the quiet hum of my computer, and the carefully curated distance I kept between myself and everyone else. But then he came along and proved that even the strongest walls have a door you never knew was there. My name is Lucas. At the time, I was a 28-year-old freelance graphic designer, which is a professional way of saying I spent most of my time alone in my apartment, talking to my ficus tree. My life ran on a schedule so precise you could set a watch by it. Wake up at 7, grind the beans, realize I was out of beans, and begin the most critical part of my day, the pilgrimage to the daily grind. It was a 10-minute walk, a perfect little buffer between the quiet solitude of my apartment and the quiet solitude of my work. The cafe was my world in miniature. The smell of roasted coffee and steamed milk, the low murmur of conversations I wasn't a part of, the clinking of ceramic on saucer. It was background noise that made my own silence feel less empty. I was an observer, a ghost in a worn-out hoodie, content to watch the little dramas of daily life unfold from a safe distance. In the center of that little world, the sun around which all the morning commuters and bleary-eyed students orbited, was Julian. Julian was the barista. But calling him a barista felt like calling a masterpiece a doodle. He moved with an easy, confident grace behind the counter, a symphony of efficient motion. One arm was a canvas of intricate tattoos, a winding serpent, a cluster of constellations, a single, perfect peony just above his wrist. I'd spent more time than I cared to admit trying to decipher them from my spot in line. He had dark, messy hair that always seemed to fall perfectly into his eyes, and a smile that could disarm a bomb. It was the kind of smile that wasn't just a stretching of lips. It lit up his entire face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. He was kind to everyone. He remembered Mrs. Gable's ridiculously complex order without her having to say a word. He'd slip an extra cookie to the little kid who came in with his mom. He had an easy rapport with the regulars, a quick joke here, a shared laugh there. And to me, he was professionally pleasant. Large black coffee for Lucas? He'd call out, his voice a warm, smooth sound that I looked forward to every morning. I was just Lucas, another name on another cup. I, of course, was hopelessly, silently, and pathetically infatuated with him. It was a safe crush, the kind you cultivate when you have no intention of ever acting on it. I told myself it was because he was probably straight. He had the kind of casual, masculine confidence that I'd always associated with guys who dated cheerleaders in high school. He was friendly because it was his job, and I was just another part of that job. Believing this was essential for the preservation of my routine. It kept him safely categorized as unattainable, an interesting painting in a museum I could admire but never, ever touch. So I existed in this state of quiet admiration for months. I learned his schedule. I knew he worked the morning shift Tuesday through Saturday. I knew he listened to indie rock, the kind with fuzzy guitars and melancholic lyrics, because it was always playing when he was in charge of the music. I knew he bit his lower lip when he was concentrating on pouring latte art. These were my secrets, little pieces of him I collected like treasures, stored away in the quietest corners of my mind. It was enough. Or at least, I told myself it was. Let me take you back to the day it all changed. It was a Thursday. The sky was that specific shade of indecisive gray that threatened rain, but couldn't quite commit. I was feeling particularly invisible that morning. A big project had been keeping me up late, and I felt less like a person and more like a collection of tired nerve endings. I shuffled into the cafe, took my place in line, and waited for my turn, rehearsing my standard, uninspired order in my head. When I got to the counter, Julian gave me that signature smile, but it seemed a little different, a little more focused. "The usual?" he asked, his eyes lingering on mine for a fraction of a second longer than normal. And in that moment, something inside me just snapped. A little wire of frustration with my own passivity. I was so tired of being the ghost in the hoodie. So, when he picked up the Sharpie and asked, "Name for the cup?" I didn't say Lucas. The words just tumbled out of my mouth before I could stop them. "The guy who thinks you have exceptional taste in music." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, a little shaky. I felt a hot blush creep up my neck, and I immediately wanted to rewind time, to vanish into thin air. I braced myself for a confused look, maybe an awkward, polite laugh. But that's not what happened. Julian paused, the Sharpie hovering over the cup. A slow, genuine smirk spread across his face. It wasn't the polite customer service smile. This was something else. Something real. He looked down, scribbled on the cup, and slid it along the counter to the espresso machine without breaking eye contact with me. "We'll see about that," he said, his voice low. My heart was doing a frantic tap dance against my ribs. I paid for my coffee in a daze, my hands fumbling with my wallet. I moved to the pickup counter, my mind racing. What did that mean? What did he write? I felt like every person in the cafe was staring at me, that my ridiculous, out-of-character comment was being broadcast over the speakers. "Large black coffee for the guy with exceptional taste in music?" Julian called out, a clear note of amusement in his voice. A few people chuckled. My face was on fire. I snatched the cup from the counter, mumbled a thank you without looking at him, and fled the cafe like it was burning down. I didn't stop until I was a block away, my back pressed against the cold brick of a building, the warm cup a trembling anchor in my hands. I finally looked down. There, in his familiar, sharp handwriting, was my ridiculous title. But underneath it, in smaller, more deliberate letters, were two words. Two words that felt less like a response and more like a detonation. It said, "Prove it." I stood there on that gray sidewalk for a long time, just staring at the cup. The heat seeped into my fingers, but I barely felt it. Prove it. It was a challenge, a joke, an invitation. I had no idea which. My mind, which was usually so good at analyzing font kerning and color palettes, was completely short-circuiting. My fortress of routine had just been hit by a wrecking ball, and all I could do was stare at the two words that had started the demolition. The entire rest of the day was a write-off. I sat at my desk, the empty coffee cup sitting next to my monitor like a sacred artifact. I couldn't focus on my work. Every line of code, every design element, just rearranged itself in my brain to spell out those two words. Prove it. The internal debate was raging. Option A. He was just messing with me. It was a bit of harmless fun, a way to break the monotony of his shift, and I was reading way too much into it. If I did anything, I'd come across as a creep who couldn't take a joke. Option B. He was actually interested. He was flirting. The challenge was real, a door he was holding open just a crack to see if I'd push it. Hope and fear were having a cage match in my stomach. The fear was familiar, a comfortable old friend. It told me to play it safe. To go back tomorrow, order my coffee, say my name was Lucas, and pretend the whole thing never happened. But the hope was new and terrifyingly strong. It whispered about the look in his eyes, the genuine curve of his smirk. It dared me to believe that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as invisible as I thought. That night, I barely slept. I tossed and turned, the conversation replaying on a loop. By 3 a.m, I had made a decision. Fear could take a back seat. For once in my life, I was going to be the guy who pushed the door. I was going to prove it. But how? What does one do to prove exceptional taste in music to a near stranger you have a debilitating crush on? I couldn't just walk in and start reciting my favorite bands. It had to be something clever, something that matched the energy of his challenge. An idea sparked. It was a little old-fashioned, a little nerdy, but it felt right. It felt like me. I spent the next hour curating the perfect 10-song playlist. It was a delicate operation. It had to be cool, but not pretentious. It had to have a couple of his favorite indie bands to show I was paying attention, but also a few deeper cuts to show I had my own taste. It had to flow. It was, without a doubt, the most important design project of my life. I found a website that could turn the playlist link into a QR code, printed it on a small, high-quality piece of cardstock, and trimmed it neatly. It looked clean, simple, intriguing. The next morning, my walk to the cafe felt like the march to a final exam I hadn't studied for. The little card was in my pocket, feeling as heavy as a brick. What if he laughs at me? What if he just throws it away? The line was shorter than usual, and suddenly, it was my turn. There he was, Julian. He looked tired, but when his eyes landed on me, that small, private smile was back. "Back for more?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. I nodded, my own voice caught in my throat. "The usual," I managed to squeak out. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was now or never. As he took my payment, our hands brushed. It was the briefest of touches, a flicker of warmth against my cold, clammy skin, but it sent a jolt straight through me. I took a deep breath. "Here," I said, pulling the small card from my pocket and placing it on the counter between us. "Proof." I tried to sound casual, like this was something I did all the time. I think I failed spectacularly. Julian looked down at the card, a confused furrow in his brow. He picked it up, turning it over in his long fingers. He scanned the QR code with his phone, and I watched his expression change as the playlist loaded. His eyes widened slightly. He scrolled through the song list, and a slow, genuine grin spread across his face. This wasn't the playful smirk from yesterday. This was pure, unadulterated delight. "Wow," he said, looking up at me. And for the first time, I felt like he was really seeing me. Not just Lucas the customer, but me. "You've got a B-side from the National on here." I thought I was the only person in this city who knew that song. "It's a great track," I said, my voice finally steady. "The whole album is underrated." We stood there for a moment, the world of the cafe fading into the background. It was just the two of us, talking about music. He told me he was trying to learn guitar, that he messed around with music production in his spare time. He confessed that the corporate-approved cafe playlist was his personal hell. It was the most we had ever spoken, a real conversation that flowed easily, naturally. A customer cleared their throat behind me, and the bubble popped. I was holding up the line. I gestured vaguely. "Right?" he said, shaking his head as if to clear it. "Yeah, your coffee." He turned to make my drink, and when he handed it to me, our fingers brushed again. This time, it felt deliberate. "I'll give it a listen on my break," he said, his voice softer now. "Thanks, Lucas." He used my real name. It had never sounded so good. That day, the coffee tasted different. Better. The world outside my window seemed brighter, the colors more saturated. I had pushed the door, and it had swung open wider than I could have ever imagined. Our little game had begun. It became our silent language, a secret conversation played out on disposable paper goods. The next day, my cup had a tiny, perfectly rendered drawing of a guitar next to my name. The day after, I left a napkin on the counter with a quote from his favorite author, which I had gleaned from a pin on his apron. He responded with a cup that just said, "You're paying attention." It felt like we were building something, a fragile bridge between his counter and my place in line, one small gesture at a time. The cafe, once a place of anonymous observation, became the highlight of my day. I started putting more effort into my appearance, swapping my worn-out hoodie for a nice sweater. I found myself smiling more. The quiet loneliness that had been my constant companion for so long was starting to recede, replaced by a fizzing, nervous excitement. Every morning was a new chapter in our strange, paper cup story. I was learning more about him, not just from our brief morning exchanges, but from watching him with a new perspective. I saw the way his public-facing confidence sometimes wavered, a flicker of insecurity in his eyes when a customer was rude. I saw the genuine passion when he talked about music with another regular. He wasn't just the effortlessly cool barista anymore. He was Julian, a real person, with layers I was just beginning to uncover. And with every new layer, my feelings for him deepened, evolving from a simple crush into something more substantial, more real. This new connection was thrilling, but it was also terrifying. What were we doing? Was this just a fun flirtation, a game to pass the time? Or was it leading somewhere? The ambiguity was a constant source of low-grade anxiety. I wanted more, but I had no idea how to ask for it. The thought of breaking the spell, of saying something that would shatter our carefully constructed world, was unbearable. So I said nothing, content to live in the delicate space we had created, hoping that he felt it too. The turning point came on a Tuesday, about 3 weeks after the first Prove It Cup. I had been wrestling with a particularly difficult client, pulling an all-nighter to meet a deadline. I worked right through the morning, fueled by stale instant coffee from the back of my cupboard. By the time I finally finished and sent the files off, it was early afternoon. I had missed my window. I hadn't gone to the daily grind. I hadn't seen Julian. A surprising wave of disappointment washed over me. It was more than just missing my caffeine fix. I felt off. My whole day was out of sync. It was ridiculous, really, how much this small morning ritual had come to mean. How much he had come to mean. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself it was just one day, but the feeling lingered, a dull ache in my chest. Later that evening, I decided to go for a walk to clear my head. The air was heavy and humid, the sky a bruised purple. As I was walking back toward my apartment, the heavens opened up. It wasn't a gentle drizzle. It was a torrential downpour, the kind that soaks you to the bone in seconds. I didn't have an umbrella, so I broke into a run, ducking my head against the onslaught of rain. As I rounded the corner onto my street, I saw a figure huddled under the awning of the closed bookstore. It was Julian. He was leaving the cafe, his shift finally over. My heart did a stupid little leap. He saw me, a half-drowned rat sprinting down the sidewalk, and a wide grin broke across his face. He stepped out from under the awning, opening a large black umbrella, and moved to intercept me. "Looks like you could use this," he said, his voice nearly lost in the roar of the rain. He pulled me in under the umbrella, into his space. Suddenly, we were standing shoulder to shoulder, so close I could feel the warmth radiating off his body. I could smell the faint scent of coffee and something else, something clean and uniquely him. The world shrank to the small, dry circle of pavement we occupied. The sound of the rain drumming on the taut fabric above us was the only sound. "Thanks," I managed, my voice breathless from both the running and his proximity. "I wasn't expecting this." "Me neither," he said, his eyes dark and serious in the dim light. We started walking toward my apartment building, our steps falling into a natural rhythm. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was charged, filled with all the things we'd been writing on cups and napkins. Being this close to him was intoxicating. My entire body was humming with a nervous energy. I was intensely aware of the way his arm brushed against mine with every step. We reached the entrance to my building all too quickly. The walk had probably only taken 2 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. We stood under the shelter of the doorway, the rain still pouring down around us. This was it. The moment would end. He would say goodnight, walk away, and we'd be back to our morning routine. The thought was unbearable. I turned to thank him, to say goodnight, but he spoke first. He looked down at me, a strange, hesitant expression on his face. "So," he said, his voice quiet but clear over the rain, "are you going to invite me in for that coffee I missed making you this morning?" The world stopped. The rain, the streetlights, the entire city of New York seemed to hold its breath. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't part of the game. It was a direct question, a real invitation. My mind went completely blank. All I could do was nod, my throat too tight to form words. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get the key in the lock. My apartment was small, but it was my sanctuary. It was filled with my books, my art, my life. Letting him in felt like letting him see a part of me that no one else did. He stepped inside, shaking the rain from his umbrella, and looked around. I watched him take it all in. The overflowing bookshelves, the half-finished painting on an easel in the corner, the neat row of design awards on a floating shelf. "This is you," he said softly, turning to look at me. "It's great. I'll, make that coffee," I stammered, needing something to do with my hands. I escaped to the kitchen, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I could feel his presence in the other room, a warm weight that changed the very atmosphere of my apartment. I focused on the task at hand, grinding beans, boiling water, the familiar ritual a flimsy shield against the overwhelming intensity of the moment. He followed me into the small kitchen, leaning against the doorframe, just watching. The space felt impossibly small with him in it. "You're nervous," he stated, not as a question, but as a gentle observation. I laughed, a short, sharp, anxious sound. "A little," I admitted, my eyes fixed on the coffee maker. "You have no idea." He was silent for a moment. Then, he pushed off the doorframe and took a step toward me. Then another. He stopped when he was standing directly in front of me, so close I had to tilt my head back to look at him. He reached out and gently brushed a stray drop of rain from my temple with his thumb. His touch was electric, a spark that ignited every nerve ending in my body. "Lucas," he whispered, and the sound of my name on his lips was an undoing. He lowered his head, his eyes searching mine, as if asking a final question. I gave him the only answer I could, leaning in just slightly. That was all the encouragement he needed. He closed the small distance between us and kissed me. It was hesitant at first, a soft, tentative press of lips. It was a question. Am I reading this right? Is this okay? And I answered by kissing him back, my hands coming up to rest on his chest. The kiss deepened, all the unspoken tension, all the longing from weeks of silent flirtation pouring into it. It was better than I ever could have imagined. It felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. And then, just as quickly as it started, it was over. Julian pulled back, his eyes wide, a look of something like panic on his face. The connection between us shattered, and the air filled with a sudden, sharp awkwardness. He took a step back, running a hand through his damp hair. The warmth was gone, replaced by a sudden, chilling distance. I should go, he stammered, not looking at me. It's late. Long shift. The excuses were clumsy, transparent. Before I could even process what was happening, before I could find my voice to ask him to stay, he was turning away. Julian, wait, I started, but he was already at the door. I'll see you around, he said, his back still to me. And then he was gone, the click of the door latch echoing in the sudden, deafening silence of my apartment. I stood frozen in my kitchen, the smell of freshly brewed coffee hanging in the air, a cruel reminder of what had just happened. The warmth of his lips was still on mine, a phantom sensation. I brought my fingers up to touch them, half convinced I had imagined the whole thing. But I hadn't. It was real. The kiss was real, and his abrupt departure was real, too. The euphoria of the kiss evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. I sank onto one of my kitchen chairs, my legs suddenly unable to support me. My mind, which had been blissfully silent for a few perfect moments, roared back to life, a whirlwind of confusion and self-doubt. What just happened? Why did he leave like that? I replayed every second of the evening, searching for the moment it all went wrong. The walk under the umbrella, his question at my door, the way he looked at my apartment, the kiss. The kiss had been perfect. I was sure of it. There was no hesitation from either of us. It was mutual, passionate, and real. So why the panic? Why did he look at me like he'd just made a terrible mistake? The familiar voice of fear, the one I had so bravely ignored just a few weeks ago, came back with a vengeance. It whispered poisonous thoughts into my ear. You misread everything. The game was just a game. He got caught up in the moment, the rain, the drama of it all, and then he realized what he was doing and regretted it instantly. You pushed too far. You ruined it. The next day was agony. I couldn't work. I couldn't eat. I just paced my apartment, the ghost of his presence in every room. Every time I looked at my kitchen counter, I saw him standing there. Every time I passed my front door, I heard the final, damning click of the latch. The central question tortured me. Should I go to the cafe? Part of me was desperate to see him, to get some kind of explanation. But a much larger, more cowardly part of me was terrified. I couldn't face the pity in his eyes, or worse, the cold, professional indifference. I couldn't bear the thought of him handing me my coffee with a polite, distant smile, our secret language forgotten, the bridge we built now a pile of rubble. So I stayed home. I drank more of that awful instant coffee and told myself I was giving him space. But really, I was hiding. A second day passed in much the same way. The silence was deafening. My apartment, once my sanctuary, felt like a prison. The hope that had bloomed so brightly in my chest over the past few weeks had withered, leaving behind only the thorns of anxiety and regret. I had been so stupid to think someone like him could be interested in someone like me. Our worlds were too different. He was the sun. I was a quiet, shadowy planet in a distant orbit. For a moment, our paths had crossed, but the laws of the universe were reasserting themselves. On the third day, I woke up and knew I couldn't do it anymore. The not knowing was worse than any potential rejection. I had to face him. I had to know for sure if it was over. I needed to hear it from him so I could begin the painful process of putting my fortress back together, of rebuilding my routine. I needed closure. I put on my oldest, most comfortable hoodie, my emotional armor. The walk to the cafe felt like a mile in lead boots. Every step was a battle. I rehearsed what I would say. Nothing. I would say nothing. I would just order my coffee, be polite, and gauge his reaction. His behavior would tell me everything I needed to know. I pushed open the door to the daily grind, the little bell chiming mockingly. I scanned the counter, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. He wasn't there. A cheerful blonde woman I'd never seen before was working the espresso machine. My heart sank. Maybe he switched his shift. Maybe he quit. Maybe he transferred to another location to avoid me. My catastrophizing brain went into overdrive. I almost turned and left, but the woman called out, Can I help you? I couldn't just leave. So I walked to the counter and ordered my large black coffee. As she was getting it ready, I tried to ask casually, "Is Julian working today?" "Oh, he called out," she said, not looking up. "I think he's back tomorrow, though," he called out. The words hit me harder than I expected. He was avoiding me. It was true. All my worst fears were confirmed. I paid for my coffee, my hands numb, and turned to leave, my mission a catastrophic failure. The closure I had been seeking was a slammed door. I pushed my way out onto the street, my head down, wanting only to get back to the miserable safety of my apartment. And then, a voice called my name. "Lucas," I stopped dead. I knew that voice. I would know it anywhere. I looked up, and there he was. Julian. He was leaning against the wall next to the cafe entrance, out of uniform, wearing a simple gray t-shirt and jeans. He looked exhausted, his eyes shadowed with sleeplessness. He looked like I felt. "I was hoping you'd come," he said, pushing himself off the wall and taking a hesitant step toward me. My mind was a blank slate. I couldn't form a single coherent thought. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could see the nervous tension in his jaw. "Look," he started, his voice rough. "I am so sorry. About the other night. The way I left, that was a stupid, cowardly thing to do. And I'm sorry for avoiding you. I didn't know what to say." "It's okay," I said, the words automatic, meaningless. "No," he insisted, shaking his head. "It's not okay. You deserve an explanation." He took a deep breath, like he was about to dive into cold water. "When I kissed you, it was the most real thing I've felt in a very long time, Lucas. And it terrified me." He looked down at his shoes, then back up at me, his gaze direct and vulnerable. "I've never done that before. With a guy? I've thought about it. For a long time, actually. But I've never acted on it. And when I did, with you, it just felt so right. And that scared the hell out of me." His confession hung in the air between us. All my theories, all my self-deprecating narratives, they all crumbled into dust. It wasn't about me. It wasn't that he regretted it. He was just scared. He continued, his words coming faster now. "I've been noticing you for months. Not just as a customer. I noticed the books you carry, the way you get lost in thought while you're waiting in line. I engineered that whole prove-it thing. It was a stupid, desperate Hail Mary because I was too afraid to just ask for your number. I thought if I could just get you to talk to me, maybe I'd have the guts to do something. But every step of the way, you were the brave one. And when it finally happened, I panicked. I ran. And I have regretted it every single minute for the past 2 days." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "I waited out here all morning. I called out of my shift because I knew I couldn't face you over the counter. I had to talk to you for real. I had to tell you that I'm an idiot, but I'm an idiot who is really, really into you." A slow smile spread across my face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated relief. The weight that had been crushing my chest for 2 days dissolved, floating away into the city air. All the anxiety, all the fear, it was all gone. "You're not an idiot," I said softly. "I kind of am," he chuckled, a wet, relieved sound. He took another step, closing the remaining distance between us. He reached out and gently took the coffee cup from my hand, placing it on the window ledge beside us. Can we try that again?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The part before I ran away." I didn't need to answer with words. I leaned in and kissed him. This time, there was no hesitation, no panic. It was a kiss of confirmation, a kiss that tasted of relief and second chances and the promise of a new beginning. It was confident and sure, a mutual acknowledgement of everything that had been building between us. When we finally pulled apart, we were both smiling. "So," I said, my voice light and happy, "does this mean I proved it?" Julian laughed, a real, joyful sound that echoed on the busy street. "Yeah, Lucas," he said, taking my hand in his. "You proved it. That was a few months ago. It's strange to look back on the person I was then, so cautious, so convinced of his own invisibility. My life is different now. The routines are still there, but they're not fortresses anymore. They're just the rhythm of our life together." Julian's shift at the cafe ends in the early afternoon, and most days he comes straight over to my apartment. We fill the quiet spaces with music and conversation. I help him design logos for his freelance music production work, and he makes sure I remember to eat when I'm on a tight deadline. We've built our own language, one that doesn't rely on paper cups. It's in the way he'll leave a new song he thinks I like playing for me when I get out of the shower. It's in the way I'll make his favorite dinner after he's had a rough day. It's in the comfortable silence we can share, sitting side by side, each working on our own projects, his hand resting on my knee. It's a language of small, quiet gestures of care. The bridge we built, that once felt so fragile, is now a permanent fixture in our lives. It's a connection I never thought I would have, a partnership I never believed I deserved. He's seen all my layers, my insecurities and my passions, and he hasn't run away. In fact, he's only moved closer. He's shown me that vulnerability isn't a weakness, but an invitation for someone to see you, truly see you. This morning, I woke up to the smell of fresh coffee. Julian was in my kitchen, a place that now feels as much his as it does mine. He handed me a mug, his eyes bright, with that same playful light from the first day our story truly began. On the side of the ceramic, he'd used a dry erase marker to write a simple message. "You're still the guy with exceptional taste in music," I laughed, a deep, happy sound that filled the sunlit room. It's funny, really. I spent so long trying to prove something to him, but in the end, he was the one who proved something to me. He proved that you can find connection in the most unexpected places. He proved that sometimes, the biggest risks lead to the most beautiful rewards. And he proved that even a quiet, solitary life has room for a love that is loud and clear and life-changing. All you have to do is be brave enough to answer when it asks you to prove it.